Okay, everybody, this is just a little explanation of Form Red from yesterday. Um, so it says, assume that the United States economy is experiencing long run equilibrium. You had to draw that, and that's going to be worth 2 points. So you get 1 point for putting equilibrium in the correct place and 1 point for putting long run aggregate supply. Then um, we have part B is pretty big, so I'm just going to go over the first one and then show you the graph. Assume that the government cuts personal income taxes by a total of $10 million, and if the marginal propensity to consume is 0.9. So for part one, you have to show this on your graph. So if they're going to cut taxes, that means that people are going to have more disposable income. This is going to shift aggregate demand to the right. And then calculating how much of a change in GDP that is, we're going to use the tax multiplier. So I'm going to scroll up to my answer key here, and you're going to have a graph that looks something like this, because then you also have to make some changes to the graph at the end. But for part one of B, you would receive 1 point for shifting that aggregate demand to the right, and then 1 point for doing the tax multiplier correctly here. So if you need to pause the video to like look at the math or anything to compare it to yours, the tax multiplier is going to be a -9 times a -10. It's an increase of $90 million in that GDP. The next part of the question asks you to comment on three different things: real wages, cyclical unemployment, and the natural rate of unemployment as a result of these changes. So, real wages, again, real anything is just the change in nominal minus the change in price level. So, if prices went up because aggregate demand shifted to the right, so we're up here, okay. Let me see if I can get over here with my pen. Nope, I can't. So we're up here. So that means that nominal wages are sticky in the short run. So that means you're still making the same amount of money you were before, except everything is more expensive, which means your purchasing power has fallen. So your real wages have fallen. This is something that students get wrong a lot. Real wages, and it's one of the reasons why we're putting it in these FRQs, is because we want you to start to think about and apply all of the things we're learning and how they're going to progress. Then we're taking a look at cyclical unemployment here. Cyclical unemployment is unemployment, of course, that's only present during the during a recession. So if we have a recession, cyclical unemployment is going to increase. But in this case, we went from a fully employed economy to an economy that was an inflationary gap. So the answer to this is that cyclical employment didn't exist before, and it's not going to exist now. The natural rate of unemployment was the next part of this question. Again, this is something that's not going to change. It's always 4 to 6%. So this part of the question is really just having you think about these three concepts and how they would apply to this hypothetical. Those were all worth 1 point each. It was sort of an all or nothing. You had to explain it, identify what would happen, and then explain. The last part of the part B says, suppose that the government opted to spend money instead of cutting taxes. Calculate the change in government spending that would be required to have the same change in GDP. So if you guys recall, the change in GDP that we had before was 90 million. How do we do that with spending? Rather than having to cut taxes by 10 million, you would actually only need to spend $9 million in spending. So again, the spending multiplier is smaller than the tax multiplier. Sorry, other way around. The spending multiplier is greater than the tax multiplier, so the numerical change doesn't have to be as great. Then the last part of the question is sort of the big thing that we were introduced to in Unit 3, and we're going to continue to work on in Unit 4 and 5. Assume that the government then allows the economy to adjust to full employment. So all this happened, and now we're just going to leave it alone. What's going to occur? Well, going back to the first part of the question, we want to just read the graph. So if prices are higher, we want to know, how is short run aggregate supply going to shift? It's going to shift to the left, because we ask ourselves the two questions: what do I know about input prices, and what do I know about productivity? All we know is that people are spending more money. So that means input prices went up and productivity is probably still the same, because we don't have any information about new technology or innovation. So if you look at the answer key here, short run aggregate supply would shift to the left. You got 1 point for shifting it to the left, and then you got 1 point, pardon me,